Whether it's the megalithic built structures that we're all familiar with, or that strange sea anomaly off the coast of California, our world is full of historic mysteries. And nobody has a reasonable explanation for really any of it. But that's changing, because I've spent the past 2 years working on a discovery and uncovering what seems to be the truth of our history. And it's much more interesting than you could ever imagine. And today, we're going to shed some light on one of those mysteries. And we're going to look at what can only be described as a story stone. And to answer the question, is this cliff that we're looking at in this image man-made or natural? It's neither. It seems my process of discovering these things seems to be somewhat of a shared experience. I've had multiple people reach out and say, I have seen exactly what you're saying, and I thought I was going crazy. It's almost like the same process that people go through. And recently I had a user reach out and inspire me for this video. And what he stated was essentially he'd been going through a hard time, and we hope that straightens up for you. Nobody wants anybody to be having a hard time. Sometimes, those hard times end up being silver linings. But this guy's going through a hard time, and he's going, to the rivers and the natural areas to clear his head, and I found myself also looking for native stuff. You always want to find the native stuff, because anything that's flint is like the coolest thing. And it's rare. And he wasn't finding much, and he began to collect these stones on his trip. And as he was collecting them, peculiar shapes or materials or whatever, he started seeing things in them just as I did. And it turns out that he began to recognize that there were actually images, just as all the stuff that I'd seen. And in his case, he described what he can only be described as a story stone or some type of elaborate image in this small particular stone. And that might seem really crazy to some people, especially when you look at these stones and they just look straight up natural. Like anybody comes to you and it's like, look, there's a whole ocean scene in this stone. Nobody's going to take them seriously. Well, I think it's true. You are seeing scenes in stones like that. That is a real thing. And this image in this cliff is very much connected to that. This cliff and the image related to it is associated with the culture that I've discovered. It was found during a process of traveling to Italy to verify the connection of this world culture. And if we are to use this discovery to analyze these random mysteries throughout the world, we need to just look at the facts of it. What do I know from the culture that I've discovered that could possibly shed light on anybody seeing a whole entire scene in a small and tiny stone? Well, is this essentially what we do know? We know that there is a world culture. I have traveled across, the world, so to speak, not completely, but at least to Europe and the Mediterranean. And I've got many followers who've also helped me confirm in South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, pretty much everywhere. So we've got this world culture. The other thing I've learned is they really like something that's called fractal. The things that they use, the shapes that they use, they repeat them in a fractal state to some degree. It's almost like you can find the same shapes of artifacts in multiple different sizes. So they're repeating these shapes. And that's the other thing is they kind of really didn't deviate from these shapes at all. And what are those shapes? Well, those shapes are representations connected to symbolism. And we do know the symbolism. In one of the last videos I discussed, the egg, the snake eating egg. The egg is one of the things that can be found on every continent. So when snakes and eggs are found faintly carved in stone in places that they shouldn't be, that's generally associated with this culture. The other things that I've learned from this culture is that their carvings are usually faint. Everything that we think about in historic, art, it's hard realism carvings. It's legit hammer and chisel kind of stuff. This is not what they did. Their stuff was very much played off of light and perspective. So they didn't need as deep of an impression to convey the image, because the light and the perspective and the angles, perspective, like that's what made this art. And so often people will find in stone these faint images and these faint scenes that can't really be made out sometimes. And a lot of times it's because they've been moved from their position. They're not sitting in the light as they should be. But that's associated with this culture. They have this faint image type carving standard. They use optical illusions to some degree, where if you move and the item is stationary, it kind of changes scenes, almost like AI does. It's really incredible. And so when we think about these things that we've learned about this culture, we analyze this suggestion. Hey, I'm finding a complete scene in a natural stone. Why? Well, because there was a worldwide culture who had a bizarre art style. And we have multiple examples of scenes. In fact, we have another one that is much larger than this cliff. It was one of the first ones I found, and it really, I had a hard time believing it myself, until I had to find more stuff to believe that. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, it was so unbelievable that I just couldn't believe it. But essentially, this is somewhere in my local area. It is not a negative of a photo. It's a screenshot from Google or Apple Maps or whatever, but it very much looks like an ocean scene. There's some fish. You got like what clearly looks like an octopus and some tentacles and stuff. And what you guys don't realize is this also explains mud fossils. Okay? When you look on Google Maps and you see these giant images in the earth, you're like, how can I explain that? And mud fossil has been the best explanation, up to this point. And a lot of people have jumped on board to that. But the reality is what's happening is those are also images. So just as this ocean landscape that I see in the hills of West Virginia, those mud fossils are actually just engineered art pieces in their own locations, in their own way, their own symbolism that is associated with this culture. So they're not formerly organic creatures. So we're already answering multiple things. Like we have proof that they do this bizarre art. We now have proof that they do these scenescapes. I personally, in my multiple years of doing this and looking at all the images and seeing the duplicates and realizing what is and is not, I personally haven't seen any miniature story stones or scenes in a stone. I've seen images that were pretty, like large, but not as that is described. However, when you consider the whole discovery that all these stones are actually art pieces that are just twisted in a special art style, it's across the world. They have the certain standard of art based around the symbolism. And then I've got examples of whole entire, mountain ranges appearing as these scenes. And I also have a cliff. So why wouldn't there also be a stone when I have fractals of everything else? I have these tiny stones in North America that are matching mountains in Italy, and the mountain in Italy matches the profile of a mountain in Tucson. Like, that's how serious they were. A lot of these mountains aren't mountains; they're structures. Like, I used to laugh at the reels or whatever on Instagram, where it would be like the pyramid shaped mountain, and they're like, oh, ancient man could be a pyramid, whatever. I was like, that's silly. It's just a mountain shaped or a pyramid shaped mountain, right? But I've discovered that that's not true. A lot of these things were structures. They had a very bizarre structure building style, and that's what this is. But before we get into who did it, let's quickly talk about like this image real quick. So I saw this on my way to Monte Cofano. Monte Cofano was like the pinnacle of my trip almost, because that whole day pretty much cemented this discovery to be the largest discovery in archaeology history. And I've said that before, and that's slightly arrogant. But what else do I say if the culture that I've discovered is the only world culture, like the first ancient world culture? Um, I mean, that's it, and that's also partially why I've covered my face. I understand the severity of the situation I'm in, and it is real. And that's why people look at this. I get so many comments that are like, "Yeah, man, I just thought you were nuts, and then I saw the thing, and then I watched again, and then it like went deeper, and then all of a sudden, you're seeing it every day." And ultimately, the power of our modern indoctrination situation is that we've been taught a thing, and so our minds don't allow us to see what's there because it can't be there. But looking at this cliff, this image I saw on the way to Monte Cofano, and it just blew my mind. I was actually kind of creeped out by it because it was so profound and so there and so obvious that I began to wonder, why weren't they discussing it? Why isn't it being brought up? This is a really beautiful carving. You can see the snake, you can see the egg. It's almost like there's a lemon or UFO. Lemon's funny too, but might be a UFO. I don't know. But you can see these faint carvings in this cliff. There's also a lot more going on in there, but a lot of the stuff is hard to make out. If there's anybody out there who actually is a whiz at Photoshop or enhancing or whatever, and wants to contribute in any way to this process, I would be grateful, because I don't know too much about that in general. And there's a lot of images and a lot of things I found that would require some kind of enhancement, and I don't have the time to sit and figure that out. And I do my best with the filters that I've got. So, any volunteers, hit me up. But ultimately, this cliff, when I first saw it, I was sure, it's just carved by ancient man in this culture. But then as I began to think about it, I realized that the stuff I found previously suggested, no, it's not ancient man. Whoever it was, appears to not have been human. And that kind of goes into the second point of what that individual said in their comment about the story stone, is like, it was so impossibly done that it was almost unexplainable. That's like where you start to make yourself feel crazy, is because if you have any, basic knowledge of fabrication and or art, and you see some of these things and you realize it's intentional, and then you see the ability, it's impossible, And the reason it's impossible is because it was for us. It wasn't ours. Whatever these things are, clearly appear to have been worshipped. And so it's, I think, safe to assume that the technology associated with those beings is not like ours. So it would be completely foolish to look through our lens to analyze their world. And I'll give you an example. I am probably the only thing, I'm probably, certified paper on the wall, this is the guy to talk to if you have a question, aluminum. I spent my whole life, or my career rather, primarily aluminum. You work on old enough airplanes, the advanced composites are few and far between, and it's aluminum all day long. And when I began to discover the prehistoric aluminum associated with this culture, which I need to do a video about, under magnification, this stuff looks like little balls, like grains of sand. And, aluminum is molten and extruded and like, under magnification, you might see grains, but it'll be more like a texture. You can see where the processes fused everything together. But when you look at their aluminum under magnification, it's different. It's like little blobs, or like things fused together in a strange way, and some of the detail is nearly impossible. And so after, pondering for hours on end about this from a professional fabrication perspective, I am completely settled on the process is beyond our capability, and we probably don't understand it. I mean, some super lab up in Nevada might understand it, but not us at this time. But there's episodes of things like the Sean Ryan show where whistleblowers talk about, you know, a giant granite brick levitating and the technology associated with it was just in some box sitting on top of it. And that's the kind of stuff I think that this is associated with. You know, you got all these creators are spending all day making videos about, oh, how did they do it? Oh, well, we know they didn't do it the way that the authorities said. That's clear. But it wasn't by any means that we can feasibly understand. It's something outside of that. And that's why it's all impossible. That's why everybody talks about, oh, you know, the calculations for this, and it would be not feasible. Of course, because it is just a completely different technology set. And so, you know, I'm totally sold that if that exists, that really explains the ability to move the megalith that are beyond our capabilities. If they have that, well, surely they have a capability to fabricate these things in a way that is beyond our capability, which as a professional fabricator, that's what I'm seeing. And as this individual mentioned in their comment, it's like that stuff is you know, it seems undoable, you know. And so it isn't natural and it isn't man-made. Somebody else made it, and they made it with a technology and an intention that we do not understand. If you want to know more about this image and how I came to discover this, I was documenting this process almost as it was happening on my YouTube channel. So I suggest you go check out these videos because they'll get you squared away or up to speed where we are almost today. I've got some more stuff coming, some other discoveries in Arizona that I haven't really posted much about yet, but that'll get you up to speed. And, you know, have an open mind. And for sure, don't trust me. You should go look yourself.